Some of the best items that you can use to decorate your home are thrifted items. Some of the best items that you can use to decorate your home are secondhand items that you find at thrift stores, items that are heavily discounted in department stores, or even things that you have in your own home. All you need to do is look at them in a different light, and you can change them up and make them something new that would fit your home. So in this video, I'm sharing some of my best thrifted, trash to treasures, discounted makeovers that I think you'll enjoy. Hello, my name is Yami. I am your Latina next door. Welcome back to mi casa. In today's very first thrifted DIY, I'm going to be sharing a beautiful piece that you can put on your front door. I had purchased this basket at a local thrift store for only 99 cents, and I wasn't too keen on the colors that it had on it. And after giving it a really good clean and wipe down, I decided that I was going to paint those little pieces that were already painted into something more that would suit my style and, of course, the season. I used an artist brush in order to paint those little pieces that I wanted to change up. This took a little bit of precision and patience, and I first started with this beautiful gypsy green color from DIY Paint. And then to brighten it even more, I decided to add white to cover those little red sections, and I think this is just a perfect combination to brighten this little basket up. Now, because this was going to go on my front door, I wanted to make sure I sealed the basket really well, and I decided to use some clear wax and applied it all over the painted areas as well as the original basket weave. I took some green floral foam and placed it on the bottom of the basket, and then I began to just place different florals that I had on hand left over from other projects in order to create a pretty arrangement. And honestly, that is all it took to create a new spring basket wreath for my front door. All right, remember that one time where my parents were on vacation and I decided to redo my bathroom that I used to use when I was a teenager in our home? Yeah. This project actually came from that bathroom makeover, and my parents actually had these beautiful wicker pieces, and I believe they came from Poland when we were stationed in Germany. I had previously painted them white, but they were definitely in need of a new paint job. They had seen better days, and I decided to just bring them back to a more natural color. And all I did was take some brown spray paint and just spray paint all the pieces all over in order to bring them back to life and to give them a completely different look. And by spray painting something like this, it's honestly one of the simplest ways you can update a piece of furniture, especially something that's wicker, and it just honestly has seen better days. And I'm so glad I did this. This ended up looking so amazing, and I was able to use it for our makeover in that bathroom. And I think honestly, it only took me about 2 cans of paint to do both of the pieces. And all I needed to do was add some little felt pads to the bottom to protect the floors that I had previously painted. And of course, added some new accessories and organization bins so that we can have a little bit more of a nicely organized space in that bathroom. And it turned out so well. One of the best things to buy secondhand is usually lamps, at least for me. And whether it's at a thrift store or on Facebook Marketplace, you get some really good deals. And I love picking stuff up that looks this good and in this great condition. And if it's a floor lamp, even more so. Sometimes all you need is a fresh coat of paint and a new shade. Now, I was inspired by this one lamp that I saw at Serena and Lily's website for almost $900. I mean, really, that's pretty ridiculous. Who would spend that much money on a lamp? Especially when mine only cost me $12.99. So I removed the shade and removed the labels and gave everything a good clean. Once everything was clean and I prepped the rest of the parts of the lamp in order to spray paint it, I took it outside and used a simple white paint all over. Now for this, I took my time because I did not sand it down before I began spray painting it, so it was very important that I use a paint and primer in one, as well as doing light strokes and several different layers. Patience is truly key when spray painting something, and I promise that a lot of light coats is going to be much better than a couple of heavy ones. Then all you have to do is remove the tape and add a new harp as well as a new shade if that's what you wish. And here is another version of some lamp makeovers that I had done. This time I wasn't really inspired by anything I saw online. However, when I saw these on Facebook Marketplace, I quickly grabbed them up so that I can use them for my parents' makeover of their family room. And again, I just taped everything, spray painted them with a new fresh coat of paint, as well as some new shades, and here is how they turned out. I had been wanting to make over a secretary desk like this, and I got to do so in our last house. Now this one had a little bit of water damage, so I wasn't able to really keep it the same color. I decided to brighten it up and change it up quite a bit. I decided to remove the doors, and then I needed to fill in all of the holes where the hinges were at and sand them smooth. And I had never really painted anything this dark before, and as you can see here, it needed quite a bit of primer because the stain from underneath was seeping through. This took several coats of primer with sanding in between each individual coat. And I did use a spray nozzle for the paint, which I don't always use. I'll be honest with you, this one wasn't the best, but I do want to try another spray gun in the future because I really did enjoy spraying paint like this. It was just so much easier and faster. So anyways, maybe in the future I'll be able to find a better spray gun. I added some beadboard paneling that I had left over from my kitchen renovation. I used a little bit of construction adhesive as well as some nails in order to set these inside of the shelves. And then I came back in with some caulking and sealed all of the gaps between the bookshelf and the boards so that it gave it a nice seamless look. Then after all the seams were caulked and everything was ready, it was time to start painting. And I used a very light gray for the exterior application of the paint. I didn't want anything too stark or white, and even though you can't really tell that it's not white in the video, it is a very pale gray. I did keep the beadboard white for a little bit of contrast, and you can see it here. And as for the hardware, I decided to paint it a bronze color. But then after looking at them on the actual piece of furniture, I didn't like how dark they were, so I decided to go another route. I pulled them off and resprayed them again with this lighter color, and it turned out much better. I fastened them back onto the furniture piece, and I styled all the shelves, and here is how it turned out. Now here's an example how you can make something that's heavily discounted in your department store work for you. I found this little pot and I wasn't really happy with the print on it, but I did like the shape, so I decided to spray paint it white. I gave it several coats until it was completely covered, and then I took some washi tape to create a border on the bottom, and then took some chalk paint and just did like a color block on the bottom of it. Once the paint was dry, I removed the washi tape, and then I took a little Dollar Tree stencil and used the asterisk that was in the center of the stencil as my template for some stenciling on top of the surface. And all I did was place it in random sections and just add the color blue all around. Now I did try to keep them a little bit consistent as far as spacing, so it did look like it was intentional. And honestly, this part of the process was so satisfying. I think this is one of the cutest DIYs that I've made, and my mother loved it so much that now she has it at her house and she uses it as a planter. This next one is one of my favorite DIYs. I found these glass votives, I think that's what they probably were, at a thrift store for 50 cents a piece. I also had these two balusters that I had bought off Facebook Marketplace for $10 for the pair, and I knew immediately that I wanted to create some candle holders from them. So I marked where I wanted them cut, and my husband cut them down for me. He also removed the bolts that were hanging off of the bottom. Next, I needed to add a couple of wood rings to the top. Because the votives were actually not flat on the bottom, I needed something like this so that I can place them on top and actually still have them sit vertically and straight. And all it needed was a little bit of wood glue. Next, I painted them this beautiful green color using my DIY paint. Once they were both dry, I used some clear wax in order to seal the candle holders. While the wax was still a little bit tacky and not all the way dry, I began adding some decrepit dust, and this is just so that it can get into all of those nooks and crannies and I can give it a nice softer tone on top of it. I like the green, but it was a little bit too powerful for me, and I wanted it to look a little bit aged and a little bit used over time. So this really helped me get into all those crevices and give it some dimension. Then I took a little bit of white wax and I did the same thing, focusing on all of those little areas where I can add a little bit more dimension as well. And using a artist brush, I began applying it throughout. Once I was happy with how everything was looking, I took a towel and began removing the excess. Here you can start seeing the difference between one that has the white wax as well as a decrepit and the original one. I even did go so far as to sand off a couple of the edges of the candle holders so that it would look a little bit more aged as well. Finally, when I was happy with how they looked, I just took some E6000 and put it all over the top ring as you see here. Then I added the glass votive, and then with a level, I made sure that it was nice and straight. And here is how they turned out. I didn't show this step, but I did add some felt underneath the candle holders so that they wouldn't damage any surfaces that they were on as well. For this one, I know you've seen these mirrors all over Dollar Tree. They have so many of them and with all different kinds of patterns. I had only this one and it was a nice size, and I decided to do something a little bit different with it. I had previously picked up this artwork at my local Goodwill and I wanted to do something with it, so I thought I would combine the two. I did want to give it dimension, however, so I decided to create a frame for it so that it would stick out. And then I would place the mirror in the center in order to create a nice piece of art. As you can see here, I had already taped off the mirror portion of the Dollar Tree piece as well as the sides of the frame. Using some E6000, I adhered the mirror onto the center of the square frame as well. Now once the mirror was completely dry, I took it over to my little spray tent and began to spray paint everything that was not taped up in white. I started off with a primer and then I did several coats of white paint, making sure that I got in all of those nooks and crevices so that I did not see any of the previous colors from before. Next, I had stained the dowels that I had previously cut a dark stain. My goal here was to match these dowels to the sides of the square frame because the sides were originally wood as well. Next, I removed all of the painter's tape and then I began to glue down all of the wood dowels to the perimeter of the square frame. And once that was dry, this is how it turned out. Next is one of the coolest pieces that I have made over. I picked this up for $50 off of Facebook Marketplace. And at the time, I was feeling really inspired seeing all of these beautiful wood pieces online with raised white decorative accents all over the front of them. And I wanted to create my own version. So I started off by removing all of the hardware and giving everything a good clean. And next I took a couple of colors of DIY paint to create my very own version of like a driftwood color for wood. And it did take me several tries to get to the color that I was looking for. And I was actually looking for a streaky look for my furniture. I wanted it to look like wood, so I was going back and forth in long strokes, as you can see here, making it seem as if it was one continuous piece of wood. And I would occasionally spray it with water in order to thin it out a little bit so I can get additional dimension throughout the surface. And I would just go back over it, as you can see here, again keeping those striations along the surface. Once I was done with the top, I worked my way to other parts of the piece. Now, because I was trying to cover this painted design on the front of the piece of furniture, it did take me more than one coat in order to seal that and just remove it completely. Now, once the first coat was dry, I came back in with a lighter coat, remixing those pieces and adding a little bit more of that yellow. And again, I did the same application throughout the entire piece for my second coat. And as you can see here, it gives it even more dimension. This definitely took a little bit more patience as well as several coats, but as you can see here, the front of it was completely covered and you can no longer see that floral pattern. Now for this next step, you can totally use a pre-made stencil that you can buy at your local craft store. However, I decided to create my very own stencil with my Cricut for this. I designed it from scratch and I cut the different pieces in order to fit on each of the drawer panels. Then I went over it with spackle. Yeah, that wall spackle that is pink and turns to white. And I kind of wiped off the excess, but I wanted it to keep it a little bit rough because I wanted these to remain raised and a little bit more on the texture side. So as soon as I would finish applying the spackle all over the stencil piece, I would make sure that it was still not dry, and this prevented it from pulling the entire piece completely when it was nice and dried and hard. I wanted to make sure that the pattern stayed on the piece of furniture. And then after everything was dry, I went in with some clear wax to seal the entire piece. Now I made sure to apply the wax in long strokes, just like I did with my faux wood paint application for this. I wanted to make sure that I did not break that up. I did that to the top, the sides, as well as the front. Now the front was a little bit more forgiving. I can go in different directions. Plus I wanted to make sure that I got into all of those nooks and crevices. And I was also able to seal all of that spackle onto the surface of those drawers. Then I came back in with some white wax in order to lighten it up and give it more of that driftwood look. I would go in small sections, add some white wax, then I would remove it as I see fit and just kind of get it to where I want it. I added some white wax in some areas, a little bit heavier than in others, again to give it that more, beachy feel. And I just think that this just turned out so beautiful using this application. Now, once you've given this sufficient time to dry, you come back in with a clean cloth and you buff out everything. You just kind of do a once over all over the place in order to give it that nice finish at the very end. Then after that, all I did was put the hardware back on. I liked it just the way it was. I think it was absolutely perfect. Here is one look of the before, and here is how it turned out. And I'll be honest, I cannot wait till I put this piece in my new home. I am praying that it made it through storage and that once it gets here, it still looks just as good as it did when I packed it up and moved it up here to Tennessee. But this piece of furniture just brings a smile to my face, and I honestly want to try this technique or variations from it in other pieces in the future. What do you think? This one's an oldie but a doozy, and it can be done with any kind of mirror. This one I found at the local Goodwill, and I was inspired during this time in order to create a beautiful trellis mirror. So I thought I would give it a go. And as you can see here, I taped everything, painted the frames, and then I also found square dowels at Hobby Lobby. Yes, they make square dowels, and I painted them with the exact same paint. And then I came in and just basically made a grid of what I wanted for my mirror. And it was actually pretty easy. I would just place it, making sure that it was measured correctly, and I would just cut them down to size. At this point, I was using my little hand saw, and I would go in, cut it, sand it, and place it on the mirror. And then I would make sure I would keep the measurements consistent and make even little markings on my frame so that whenever I created the trellis pattern, it would be even all over. So I made sure to track my measurements and make sure that everything was nice and even. Once I was happy with the result, I came in with some wood glue and began to glue all of my seams, and then I pulled the grid out and began to sand off as much of that wood glue as possible. I gave the mirror a good clean, and then using some E6000, I popped the grid back in. It fit perfect, and that was it for this mirror. I did go back though and add a little bit of distressing with a little bit of gray paint, but that was all I did. And look at the savings on that. That was a great look for less dupe. Now for this next one, I had bought several pieces of items from my local thrift stores, and I was just kind of going through the motions and tackling them one at a time. For this one, I picked this green vase, and I was inspired by those Artisan hand-painted vases at Pottery Barn, and I wanted to give it this look. I decided to use wall spackle for this, and I began applying it all over the surface of the vase. Those little floral details that you see on the green vase, those were actually indentations, and I wanted to make sure that I filled those in. So if it not had that, I probably wouldn't have had to do this step, but again, I wanted to make sure that it was a smoother surface. So this took me several layers, and several times I had to, sit and wait, let everything dry, and come back to it. So it required a bit of patience. Now, once I was happy with the thickness of the spackle, I came in with sanding paper and I began to sand everything nice and smooth, trying to get rid of some of those ridges that I had created with my hand. Now, it wasn't going to be perfect because I did want it to look like it was handmade and old, so I kept a couple of areas a little bit rougher than others, and that was fine. When I was happy, I came in with some chalk paint and I began to paint the surface a nice light color for the base. Now, I did do a couple of coats of that paint just to make sure that no green was peeking through. And as you saw, I also painted the inside top part of the vase because I did not want, again, that green from the inside showing. Next, I took some more of that paint and added some wax to it to give a new layer to the piece with a little bit more dimension. I'm going to start applying this all over and just trying to get that artisan kind of dirty look to the vase. This is one of those things where you kind of just try, figure out what you like, what you don't like. If you mess up, you can go back and paint over it, which I did in several areas. But yeah, this is just one of those things where you just have to try it out, see how you like it, and just keep going and kind of refining your method. Now, as I went on, the more layers I added, the darker the colors I began to applying. I started off a little light because I was kind of scared at first that I would mess it up. But as I was getting more comfortable, I began darkening some spots as you see here, and it just gave it that beautiful dimension, that old pottery look, and it just turned out amazing. This next one is another fun makeover. I had bought these candle holders at my local Goodwill, and I wanted to change up their look. They had good bones, but I was determined to just really transform them, and I wanted to add beads to them. And this was kind of before all of like the home decor wood pieces that you would see would have beaded accents throughout. I had these wood beads and I decided to string them along in order to attach them to the candlesticks. I tied them securely around the top neck of the candlestick, and then I also created a second one for the bottom. I used a little bit of glue so that they would stay put, and then I would tie them as tightly as possible, making sure that the beads were very close to each other and I did not see any of that string come through. I would tie it off and then I would cut it really close to the edge. Now, because I wanted it to look like one piece, I added spackle to this as well, filling in all of those nooks and crevices between those beads. And then I would come back with a small piece of sanding paper and I would just kind of clean it up a little bit and make each bead just kind of come through that spackle, just kind of give it a little bit more definition, but in a more cleaner way. Once that was done, I came back in with a very light mossy green color and I painted the entire candlestick, giving it several coats for full coverage. And this is chalk paint as well. You can see here the difference between the original candlestick and the new one. Of course, you know me, and I wanted to add a little bit of dimension, so I took some of DIY Paint white wax and began to apply it throughout, getting in all of those nooks and crevices and giving the candlesticks a little bit more dimension. I did this with an old sock that had no pair. Actually, socks that have no pairs or that lose their mates, you know, those are the best ones for some of these projects. I did come in with an artist brush as well and just used that in order to apply the wax in several areas to help me out. Now, here is a difference between one without the white wax and one with it. The one on the right has white wax and the one on the left doesn't. It is a slight difference, but you can definitely see it. And then once I was done with that, I added some clear wax in order to seal the candlesticks. That way the finish is protected. And that was basically it for this DIY. For this next DIY, we're going to be using these metal frames that are supposed to be for shelves. Now, they originally had glass shelves, but they did not have them anymore, and so the lady sold me 2 of these for only $10 for the pair. Now, Nelson and I had some of that faux shiplap board from our previous pantry makeover, so I just asked him to cut these down to size, and that way I can make some shelves. After they were all cut, I came in and began to paint them. Now, I needed to make sure that both sides were covered in paint because I was going to see them from the top as well as from the bottom. Now, at first, the paint was a little bit too yellow for me, so I made some adjustments and I was able to get them a little bit more creamier. And honestly, that's the best thing about DIYing, is that if you don't like the direction something is going, you can always change course and make adjustments. After I painted them, I waited till they were dry, and then I got these stamps from IOD, and this is supposed to be like an old French newspaper, and I thought it'd be fun to stamp these with this. And this is something that I hadn't really done before, and I just had a blast. You know, all you have to do is add the ink to this and just start stamping like you would, just press down nice and evenly. And I did that to all the boards, and if it doesn't come out perfect, it's okay because it's supposed to look aged. I did want to seal this because I didn't want any of this to be damaged by anything that I might put, whether it be a plant or something, and I decided to add clear wax. Now, it did smudge a little bit, but that's okay. It kind of just added to the charm in my opinion because it was supposed to look old. And I did this to all of them before putting them back. Here is how they turned out once the little shelves were installed. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but when I did the bathroom at my parents' house, one of these made it to the wall in that bathroom, and it is still there. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up. And let me know in the comments below which one of these thrifty DIYs was your favorite. I am super excited to get started on more DIYs as soon as we move into the house. Make sure you are subscribed so that you can see what's going on, see the updates, and see all of the interior design that I am planning for future videos. I hope you're doing well, and I look forward to seeing you back here next week with another video. Until then, adios!